It started with a whisper that spread through the corridors of Buckingham Palace like wildfire. One sentence, allegedly spoken by Prince William, has sent shockwaves through the entire United Kingdom and left his own brother, Prince Harry, in tears. "I don't recognize my brother anymore. He chose fame over family." Just reading that line is enough to make your stomach turn. To imagine the weight of betrayal, the weight of someone so close turning away from everything you believed in. But what does it really mean when a brother, a lifelong companion, suddenly becomes a stranger? And more importantly, how did it come to this? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. From the outside, the world saw two princes who grew up together, inseparable in childhood. The royal photographers captured them laughing in the gardens of Kensington Palace, building forts, playing football on the palace lawns. Everyone assumed that these two young princes, bound not just by blood but by a shared childhood and public duties, would always have each other's backs. But behind the polished images and smiling faces, something was simmering, something no one expected. The story we're about to explore is not just about royal gossip or tabloids hunting for a scandal. It is about family, loyalty, heartbreak, and choices that no one can take back. Imagine for a moment the person you grew up with, who knew your deepest fears and your most vulnerable moments, suddenly deciding that their ambition, their fame, or their own vision of life outweighs everything you shared. How would you feel? Could you forgive it? Or would you, like William, feel an emptiness so deep that you can barely recognize the person you once called your brother? You might think you know the story. After all, Harry has been in the spotlight for years. Interviews, documentaries, books, charity events, Hollywood appearances. The media has painted him as the troubled younger prince, the one who rebelled, the one who chose freedom over duty. But what if there is more beneath the surface? What if William's heartbreak reveals a side of Harry that the public has never seen? And what if the choices Harry made were not just about seeking happiness or independence, but about something far more calculated, far more shocking than anyone could have imagined? Let's rewind to the beginning. William and Harry were born into a world of privilege, yes, but also immense scrutiny. Every move watched, every smile dissected, every misstep amplified. Yet, in those early years, they had each other. Diana, their mother, often described them as a unit, a pair that could weather anything together. They played together, fought together, and confided in each other like only brothers can. William, the elder by 3 years, often took on a protective role. He was the one who would shield Harry from the teasing of peers, the harsh words of adults, and the unrelenting glare of the media. Harry, in turn, admired William, looked up to him, followed in his footsteps in many ways, and trusted him more than anyone else in the world. And yet, something changed. It didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen with a single event. It was a series of moments, small fractures that slowly widened into a canyon. At first, it was subtle. A disagreement about responsibilities, a misunderstanding about loyalty, a difference in opinion about public life. But as Harry began to pursue opportunities outside the royal mold, television interviews, speaking engagements, high-profile charity events, those small cracks grew. William watched with growing concern, his love for his brother clashing with his fear that the Harry he knew and loved was slipping away. The tension reached its first public boiling point with the infamous media controversies, where Harry's every action was scrutinized, every comment analyzed. But the real heartache came in private, behind palace walls, away from cameras and reporters. William reportedly tried to reach out. He allegedly sent messages, letters, even tried to meet with Harry face to face. But every attempt was met with resistance or deflection. It wasn't just the public persona of Harry that changed. It was the private man, the brother, who now seemed distant, detached, and sometimes unrecognizable. The United Kingdom watched in shock as stories leaked. Friends and insiders spoke of late-night arguments, private confrontations that ended in tears, and William's growing sense of betrayal. It wasn't just about duty, it wasn't just about protocol, it was about family. And the message William allegedly gave, spoken in frustration and heartbreak, summed it all up. "I don't recognize my brother anymore. He chose fame over family." Think about that for a moment. Not political differences, not public disagreements, family. The bond that is supposed to be unbreakable. Gone. Lost. But why would Harry make this choice? Was it the allure of fame, the bright lights, the Hollywood lifestyle? Or was there something deeper, something more personal driving him? The answer is complicated, layered, and filled with contradictions. On one hand, he's celebrated for charitable work, for his candor in interviews, for breaking away from the confines of royal tradition. On the other hand, those very choices created distance, resentment, and heartbreak within his own family. And somewhere in the middle lies the truth, a truth that the public may never fully know, but that William, at least, felt acutely and painfully. Imagine being William in those moments. The one who always had to be the responsible figure, the one who carries the weight of the monarchy, and now the one who sees a brother he loved making choices that hurt not just the family, but the institution, the legacy, and himself. Can you imagine that pain? The mixture of anger, sorrow, and disbelief? The feeling of watching someone you love more than anyone else in the world slip away into a world of their own making? It's the kind of heartbreak that doesn't heal easily. And yet, there's more to this story. Because this isn't just about William's heartbreak or Harry's choices. It's about the ripple effects. The UK is in shock because the stakes are high, not just personal, but public. The monarchy, already under scrutiny, now faces a deeper, more intimate scandal. Media outlets, social networks, and tabloids are alive with speculation. But even more compelling are the private stories, the behind-the-scenes confrontations, the text messages, the private confessions that never made it to the public eye. These are the details that make this story not just interesting, but unforgettable. Now, ask yourself, if someone you trusted implicitly could betray you in this way, would you confront them? Would you forgive them? Or would you, like William, carry that heartbreak quietly, trying to protect the image of the family while your heart aches in silence? And more importantly, what would you do if the world was watching every step of your private pain? Over the next hour, we will dive deep into this fractured relationship. You'll hear about the golden childhood that once promised unbreakable bonds, the first rifts that went unnoticed, the choices that pulled them apart, and the private moments of heartbreak that left William questioning everything he thought he knew about his brother. You'll hear about the media storms, the leaked conversations, and the emotional confrontations that never reached the public eye. And finally, you'll discover the shocking revelation that could change everything about how the world sees these two brothers. But before we go any further, let me ask you again. Have you ever felt betrayed by someone you loved so completely that you didn't recognize them anymore? That is exactly the position William found himself in, and the pain, frustration, and heartbreak of that realization is what has left the entire UK in shock. And what came next, the private words, the confrontations, and the moments of truth, would change everything for both brothers forever. Stay with me, because what we're about to uncover is not just another royal story. It's a story of love, betrayal, choices, fame, and heartbreak. A story that reaches beyond the palace walls and asks each of us a haunting question. What would you choose if loyalty and ambition were at odds, and the person you love most in the world no longer seems to be the same? And as we move forward into the first chapter, remember this. The first crack in their relationship wasn't caused by a scandal, an interview, or a public statement. It was something far quieter, far more insidious, and it set the stage for everything that followed. What happened in those early, private moments would ripple outward, affecting not just the brothers themselves, but the entire monarchy, the public, and the world watching every move. And what came next? What secret confrontation, what private message, what emotional breaking point pushed William to say the words that shocked a nation? Those details will start unfolding in the very next chapter. And trust me, you're not going to want to miss a single moment. Imagine a world where the laughter of two young princes echoed through the halls of Kensington Palace, a world where life seemed flawless, and yet, underneath the golden veneer, the seeds of rivalry were quietly being sown. From the outside, William and Harry's childhood looked like a storybook fantasy, sprawling gardens, royal tutors, and cameras capturing their every adorable moment. But did anyone stop to ask what it was really like to grow up under the weight of the crown, constantly watched and constantly compared? Even as young children, the bond between William and Harry was palpable. William, the elder by 3 years, often assumed the role of protector. He would stand up when Harry was teased, mediate fights with peers, and offer guidance in the small but significant ways that only older brothers can. Harry, in turn, idolized William. He followed him everywhere, copying his gestures, learning from him, and confiding in him secrets he didn't dare tell anyone else, not even his parents. Their mother, Princess Diana, often described them as inseparable. She called them her two boys, her little warriors, a duo capable of facing the world together. It's easy to look at photos of them running across palace lawns, laughing with abandon, and assume that nothing could ever come between them. But childhood, especially royal childhood, is rarely as simple as it seems. The constant scrutiny, the unrelenting public gaze, and the invisible weight of expectations created cracks that, over time, would widen. There were moments of jealousy, moments of frustration, moments where competition silently crept in. And sometimes, even in the laughter, you could sense the beginnings of a subtle divide. The early years were full of private adventures that only the brothers shared. They built forts in the gardens, played football in secret corners of the palace, and whispered secrets late at night when they should have been asleep. Those moments of pure, unadulterated childhood are rare in any life, let alone a royal one. Yet they were fleeting. For every day of freedom, there was another of pressure to conform, to excel, to represent the monarchy in ways that often felt unfair to children who just wanted to be brothers. Princess Diana worked tirelessly to shield them from the harsher realities of royal life. She introduced them to the world with warmth, ensuring that while the cameras followed, the boys always had their sanctuary, a sense of normalcy. Diana understood that childhood, even royal childhood, needed laughter, play, and love. But she also knew that life outside the palace gates was unforgiving, that every misstep could be magnified, and that the media would eventually invade the most private corners of their lives. And in protecting them, she inadvertently set the stage for a complex interplay of loyalty, admiration, and subtle competition between William and Harry. The early bond was tested in ways no outsider could understand. There were incidents that seemed trivial at the time: a stolen toy, a disagreement over bedtime, a fight over a game. But in retrospect, these small conflicts were the first signs of the subtle rift that would later grow into a chasm. William, ever responsible, often assumed the role of disciplinarian. Harry, rebellious even as a child, sometimes resisted authority, not out of malice, but as a natural expression of independence. Those moments, innocent as they seemed, created patterns of behavior that would echo into adulthood. Even as they grew, the brothers maintained a connection that was both deep and complicated. William was protective but demanding. Harry was affectionate but sometimes defiant. They shared jokes, pranks, and secret hideaways, but they also began to develop individual identities that didn't always align. William's sense of duty, instilled from a young age, often clashed with Harry's desire for freedom and exploration. And while Diana worked to nurture both paths, she couldn't prevent the tension that would slowly emerge. Schooling provided both sanctuary and subtle competition. At times, William excelled academically, gaining accolades and praise. Harry, though intelligent and capable, sometimes struggled with the pressures of expectation, and in those moments, the gap between them seemed to grow. It wasn't just grades, it was the way the world saw them. William was often the model student, the future heir in miniature, while Harry's natural charisma and charm made him both beloved and scrutinized. These dynamics planted the first seeds of the eventual divide, a divide that would widen in ways no one could have predicted. Despite these early tensions, there were moments that highlighted their closeness. On family holidays, they would sneak away to explore corners of estates that the public never saw. They shared jokes and stories late into the night, confiding in one another in ways that spoke to a trust built over years. These moments were precious, almost sacred, and they created memories that both brothers would carry into adulthood. Yet, in the back of William's mind, a quiet unease began to stir. A sense that Harry, despite his charm and warmth, might one day choose a path that would diverge sharply from his own. One particularly revealing anecdote involves a childhood camping trip. William, tasked with leading the expedition, took meticulous care to ensure that everything went smoothly. Harry, on the other hand, decided to explore off the trail, curious about the world beyond the plan. When he returned, he was exhilarated by what he had discovered, but William was frustrated, not because of the adventure, but because it had disrupted the careful structure of their plan. This moment, seemingly minor, illustrates the dynamic that would define their relationship. William, the protector and planner, and Harry, the explorer who sometimes followed his own instincts, regardless of the consequences. The golden childhood, however, was not without its shadows. The presence of the media loomed like a constant specter. Paparazzi helicopters hovered, cameras clicked at every turn, and innocent missteps became headlines. William and Harry learned early that their lives were public property, that their private moments could be captured and interpreted in ways that were often cruel. This awareness added layers of complexity to their bond. They needed each other more than ever, yet the very pressures that bonded them also created tension. Perhaps most importantly, this period cemented a pattern of reliance and admiration. Harry looked up to William in ways that shaped his early worldview. He admired his brother's discipline, his sense of responsibility, and his ability to command respect. William, in turn, felt a protective obligation that went beyond mere sibling affection. He carried a sense of duty toward Harry that would persist even as the years went on. These early dynamics were critical because they set the emotional stage for every confrontation, every heartbreak, and every moment of disappointment that would come later. But even in these golden years, there were hints of what was to come. William, naturally conscientious and aware of his role in the monarchy, sometimes expressed concern that Harry's impulsiveness could one day create problems. Harry, feeling the push and pull of freedom versus responsibility, began to form ideas about the world that didn't always align with William's vision. These subtle differences, combined with external pressures, planted the first seeds of what would eventually become a deep and public rift. The childhood they shared was a paradox, full of laughter and mischief, but shadowed by the responsibilities they would one day inherit. Full of trust and affection, but layered with subtle competition and differences in personality. And as the world watched them grow, few realized that the bond everyone admired so much was being quietly tested, stretched, and challenged in ways that would define the rest of their lives. So, as we leave behind these early, formative years, the question emerges: could any bond withstand the pressures of public life, personal ambition, and the subtle betrayals that come from growing up in the spotlight? William and Harry's golden childhood was filled with joy, yet it also carried the first hints of heartbreak that would one day shock a nation. And the truth is, what seemed like innocent rivalry in their youth was only the beginning. But what came next, the first real rift that neither brother could ignore, would change everything. And what happened in those pivotal moments behind palace walls would set the stage for a confrontation that no one saw coming. The next chapter begins with a question that has haunted both brothers for years. How do you protect a bond that seems unbreakable, only to watch it start to fracture in ways you never imagined? What happens when the bond you've trusted for your entire life suddenly starts to crack? When the person you believed would always be by your side begins to drift away? For William and Harry, that moment wasn't dramatic or explosive. It didn't arrive with a public confrontation or a headline-grabbing scandal. It began quietly, subtly, like the first signs of a storm on a calm day. A whispered disagreement, a misinterpreted gesture, a small choice that seemed inconsequential at the time. And yet, these tiny fractures would grow into a rift that eventually left both brothers grappling with heartbreak, resentment, and disbelief. The first signs of tension were almost invisible. As children, William had always been responsible, methodical, and cautious. He approached life with structure, planning each step carefully, aware of the scrutiny that came with being heir to the throne. Harry, by contrast, was impulsive, adventurous, and driven by curiosity. At first, this dynamic seemed harmless, even complimentary. William would keep them safe, Harry would push the boundaries, and together they navigated childhood with excitement and mischief. But over time, those differences began to create friction. The first rift can be traced to small, seemingly trivial moments. Perhaps it was a disagreement over a game of football in the palace gardens. William wanted to follow the rules. Harry wanted to play by instinct. Perhaps it was a family event where Harry's attention drifted to friends or the media, while William adhered strictly to expectations. Each incident alone was minor, but as they accumulated, a pattern emerged. William began to notice that Harry's decisions didn't always consider consequences, not just for himself, but for the family, for the monarchy, for the image they were expected to uphold. And William, who had always taken responsibility seriously, began to worry. Even at this early stage, Harry sensed the pressure. He felt constrained, criticized, and sometimes misunderstood. He longed for freedom, for the chance to make choices without the constant shadow of scrutiny. But William, bearing the weight of duty and expectation, often perceived Harry's actions as defiance, as rebellion, as a rejection of their shared responsibilities. And in those early disagreements, a silent tension took root, a tension neither brother fully understood at the time, but that would define their relationship for years to come. It wasn't just about rules or responsibility. It was about perception, about trust, about loyalty. William believed that Harry's behavior, whether in games, schoolwork, or public appearances, reflected not just on him, but on their entire family. Harry, in turn, began to see William as overbearing, judgmental, and sometimes cold. The seeds of resentment were planted, growing quietly beneath the surface of their otherwise happy childhood. One of the most telling incidents occurred during a family holiday. The brothers were expected to adhere to a strict schedule, with formal dinners, rehearsed appearances, and structured activities. Harry, restless and eager for adventure, chose to explore the estate grounds without permission. William, frustrated and concerned, confronted him. The exchange was heated. Words were spoken in anger, voices raised for the first time in a way that would leave lasting memories. For William, it was about responsibility. For Harry, it was about autonomy. And in that moment, a subtle but meaningful divide began to appear. The role of their mother, Princess Diana, cannot be overstated. She noticed the first signs of tension and worked tirelessly to mediate. She reminded William to be patient, to understand Harry's perspective. She encouraged Harry to respect his elder brother's sense of duty and caution. But despite her best efforts, the differences persisted. Childhood, even under the best circumstances, cannot always reconcile fundamentally different personalities, especially when amplified by the pressures of royal life. School life added another layer of complexity. William often excelled in academics and sports, receiving praise and accolades that seemed to follow him everywhere. Harry, while capable, sometimes struggled under the spotlight, feeling that every misstep would be magnified. This dynamic only fueled the first rift. William's success inadvertently highlighted Harry's challenges, and Harry's resistance to expectations sometimes provoked William's disapproval. The balance that had once existed between the brothers shifted, creating a subtle tension that neither fully recognized at the time. Yet, even as cracks formed, the bond remained. There were moments of laughter, of shared joy, of adventures that reminded them, and everyone around them, of the closeness they once had. But the rift persisted, lurking in the background, a quiet tension that would only grow more pronounced as they moved into adolescence and early adulthood. Every decision, every choice, every perceived slight added another layer to the growing divide. It was during these formative years that the first emotional stakes were set. William, ever protective, began to internalize a sense of responsibility for his brother's choices. He worried that Harry's impulsiveness could have lasting consequences, not just for him, but for the family and monarchy. Harry, meanwhile, felt increasingly constrained, misunderstood, and judged. Their perspectives, shaped by different priorities and life experiences, created a silent war of expectations, one that would simmer beneath the surface for years to come. By the time they reached their teenage years, the rift had become more apparent. Friends, tutors, and advisors began to notice subtle changes in their interactions. Conversations that were once easy and playful became tinged with tension. Decisions that once seemed harmless now provoked arguments. And even when the public saw them together, laughing at events, playing sports, attending ceremonies, the private reality was far more complicated. The first rift was also about perception and media scrutiny. Paparazzi and journalists were constantly watching, capturing moments out of context, and often portraying disagreements as scandalous. William, protective and cautious, became wary of public perception, while Harry, more rebellious and independent, chafed under the scrutiny. These external pressures amplified internal tensions, creating a situation where even small disagreements could feel monumental. One particularly revealing episode involved a private confrontation in their early teens. A misunderstanding over a family obligation escalated into a heated argument. William reportedly said something meant to guide, to instruct, but Harry interpreted it as criticism, judgment, and rejection. The words spoken in that room would echo for years, shaping the way each brother viewed the other. Trust, once implicit, began to erode. Admiration, once unquestioned, began to be tinged with frustration. And what began as a subtle rift now threatened to become a permanent divide. Yet, despite these tensions, moments of closeness still existed. They laughed, shared jokes, and confided in one another. But the rift had been planted, and like a seed in the soil, it would grow in ways neither could have anticipated. The first fractures, small as they seemed, were setting the stage for the dramatic confrontations, betrayals, and heartbreaks that would later define their adult relationship. The question, then, becomes inevitable. How do you protect a bond that seems unbreakable when the first cracks appear? How do you respond when the person you trust implicitly begins to make choices you don't understand or don't approve of? For William and Harry, these questions would dominate their teenage and young adult years, culminating in confrontations that would leave both of them and the world stunned. And what came next was the moment when that rift, silent and subtle for so long, began to roar. Private confrontations, emotional arguments, and choices that prioritized ambition over family set the stage for a conflict that would ripple through the monarchy and captivate the public. The first rift had been established, but it was only the beginning of a much larger, far more dramatic story, a story that we will continue unfolding in the next chapter. The moment Harry first stepped into the spotlight and began to define his own path. What if the person you grew up beside, laughed with, and confided in suddenly seemed to live in a completely different world? That world arrived for Harry not in a single moment, but gradually, like the sunrise creeping across a palace courtyard. While William quietly embraced the responsibilities of royalty, Harry began carving out a path that was very much his own, a path illuminated by media attention, global admiration, and the intoxicating allure of fame. And with each step he took into the spotlight, the divide between the brothers grew wider, leaving William increasingly concerned, and Harry increasingly enthralled by the possibilities that lay beyond the palace walls. From a young age, Harry had always exhibited a flair for the dramatic. He loved being the center of attention, not for vanity, but because he thrived on connection. Unlike William, whose sense of duty often required restraint, Harry was impulsive, charismatic, and instinctively attuned to people. He had a natural magnetism that drew attention wherever he went. Teachers, peers, even strangers seemed to gravitate toward him. And as he entered adolescence, that magnetism became more than a personality trait. It became a force that would shape the course of his life. The early signs of Harry's attraction to the spotlight appeared in subtle ways. School events, charity functions, and public appearances revealed his ease with crowds, his confidence in addressing audiences, and his ability to charm even the most critical observers. While William focused on mastering the expectations of royalty, Harry began testing boundaries, exploring how far he could push the limits of what was acceptable. At first, these experiments were small, speaking more freely, engaging playfully with media photographers, or expressing opinions that diverged from official royal statements. But each instance, however minor, built a pattern that hinted at a deeper desire for independence and recognition. The turning point came when Harry first began participating in high-profile charity events. He had always been inspired by his mother, Princess Diana, whose compassion and willingness to use her position for good left an indelible mark on him. Harry's engagement in charitable causes was genuine, and his charisma allowed him to connect with people in a way few royals could. But as he increasingly appeared in public, the line between service and spectacle blurred. The media eagerly covered his every move, and with each headline, the spotlight grew brighter. What might have been a private act of generosity became a public performance, and Harry began to enjoy the attention as much as the purpose. It was during this period that William's concerns became more pronounced. He saw his younger brother being drawn into a world of fame and visibility, a world in which personal choices and public perception were inseparably linked. William, whose sense of responsibility demanded caution, feared that Harry's growing celebrity could have unintended consequences, not just for himself, but for the family and the monarchy. The careful balance they had once maintained, built on shared experiences and trust, was being challenged by a combination of ambition, impulsiveness, and public fascination. Harry's transformation was also fueled by his exposure to global media and celebrity culture. Trips abroad, encounters with influential figures, and invitations to events outside the UK offered him experiences that few could resist. While William remained grounded in the expectations of royalty, Harry was increasingly exploring what it meant to live on his own terms. These experiences were thrilling, but they also widened the emotional distance between the brothers. William watched from the sidelines, torn between admiration for Harry's courage and fear for the potential fallout. The contrast between the brothers became more apparent in everyday interactions. William, methodical and disciplined, focused on long-term planning, official engagements, and measured appearances. Harry, energetic and spontaneous, often chose his path based on instinct, opportunity, or passion. Small disagreements over schedules, priorities, or public appearances began to highlight differences in perspective. William interpreted Harry's choices as recklessness or disregard for duty. Harry perceived William as controlling, judgmental, and resistant to change. The tension was subtle at first, often masked by smiles and polite conversation, but it was unmistakable to those closest to them. A particularly illustrative incident involved a charity event that both brothers attended. William arrived early, meticulously prepared, ensuring that every detail was perfect. Harry, on the other hand, took a different approach. He engaged with attendees informally, spoke candidly to the media, and made a spontaneous, heartfelt speech that diverged from the official script. While the public celebrated Harry's charm and authenticity, William was left frustrated, concerned that the deviation could be interpreted as disrespectful or reckless. This moment encapsulated the emerging divide. William, the cautious heir, focused on duty. Harry, the impulsive younger prince, drawn toward personal expression and attention. Harry's path into the spotlight was not without internal conflict. He grappled with the tension between his love for family and his desire for independence. He understood the weight of expectation, the scrutiny of the public, and the potential consequences of his choices. Yet, the allure of carving out his own identity proved irresistible. He was no longer content to live in William's shadow or adhere strictly to the monarchy's rules. He wanted recognition, impact, and a life defined on his terms. And as he increasingly embraced this path, William's disappointment grew, along with the silent heartbreak of realizing that the brother he once knew was slipping further away. The public began to notice the change as well. Media outlets picked up on subtle differences in demeanor, choice of engagements, and personal style. Headlines contrasted William's measured approach with Harry's vibrant, spontaneous presence. Commentators speculated on sibling rivalry, personality clashes, and potential rifts. Social media amplified the narrative, offering endless speculation and analysis. And while some viewed Harry's rise as inspiring, others saw it as a threat to the stability and image of the monarchy. But behind the headlines, the emotional reality was far more complicated. William experienced a mix of pride, frustration, and heartbreak. He admired Harry's courage and charisma, yet he feared the consequences of decisions that seemed impulsive or self-serving. Harry, for his part, felt a growing sense of isolation, as though his attempts to forge an independent path were misunderstood by the very family he loved. This tension created an emotional chasm, one that widened with every public appearance, every media interview, and every personal choice that placed Harry further in the spotlight. One of the most critical moments in this phase involved Harry's first major solo public engagement outside the UK. It was a chance to step into the world independently, to define his identity beyond the royal family. He excelled, captivating audiences, drawing attention, and earning accolades. But William, observing from a distance, reportedly felt a pang of sadness. Pride mixed with fear, admiration mingled with concern. He saw the bright lights and the applause, but he also saw the growing distance between them. And in that moment, William began to recognize a painful truth. His brother was changing, and some aspects of that change could not be reversed. Harry's journey into the spotlight also exposed him to new friendships, mentors, and influences outside the traditional royal circle. Some were positive, encouraging his charitable work and personal growth. Others, however, introduced ideas about fame, media strategy, and personal branding that further propelled him away from William's cautious approach. Each interaction, each experience, subtly reshaped Harry's priorities, reinforcing the path he was choosing, one that emphasized visibility, individuality, and personal achievement over familial conformity. The implications of Harry's choices extended beyond personal identity. Every decision had consequences for William, the monarchy, and the perception of the royal family worldwide. William, who had always assumed responsibility for both his own actions and the legacy he inherited, watched as Harry increasingly acted independently. He tried to offer guidance, advice, and warnings, but Harry's attraction to the spotlight often led him to pursue his own instincts. Each success, each triumph in the public eye, was both a source of pride and a reminder of the emotional distance growing between them. By the end of this period, it was clear that the brothers were no longer navigating life in parallel. They were diverging on as separate paths. William, bound by duty and tradition, remained focused on stability, responsibility, and long-term planning. Harry, drawn to media attention and the freedom of self-expression, pursued a path that increasingly prioritized personal choice over family cohesion. This divergence, once subtle, had become pronounced, setting the stage for the confrontations, heartbreak, and revelations that would follow in later years. And yet, despite the growing divide, the bond of brotherhood still lingered. Moments of laughter, private conversations, and shared memories continued to remind them, and the world, of the connection that had once seemed unbreakable. But the spotlight, with all its allure, had changed the rules. And what came next? The private confrontations behind palace walls, the emotional confrontations William feared, and the choices Harry would make under intense scrutiny, would push this bond to the breaking point. The first public signs of tension were only the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the surface, the emotional storm was gathering. William's heartbreak was deepening, Harry's desire for independence was intensifying, and the rift between them was growing. What seemed like success for one brother was heartbreak for the other. And as we move into the next chapter, you'll discover the private confrontations that neither brother could ignore, the moments that would define their fractured relationship and set the stage for the shocking revelations to come. What happens when the world doesn't see the real drama? When the headlines and photos only hint at the storm raging behind closed doors. For William and Harry, the palace walls were both sanctuary and battlefield, a place where love, loyalty, and frustration collided in ways no one outside could truly understand. These private confrontations, often invisible to the public eye, revealed the raw, emotional truth of their fractured relationship. Hurt, disappointment, and a growing sense of betrayal that would one day shock the entire United Kingdom. The first confrontations were subtle, almost imperceptible. Words spoken quietly in the corridors of Kensington Palace, gestures laden with meaning, tension simmering in a look or a sigh. At first, William tried to be patient. He understood that Harry was carving his own path, that youthful impulses sometimes clashed with the expectations of royalty. But patience, as anyone knows, has limits. And William, carrying the weight of responsibility not just for himself, but for his family and the monarchy, reached a point where restraint was no longer possible. One evening, a particularly revealing confrontation took place in the private quarters of the palace. Harry had returned late from a public engagement, one that William felt had been poorly coordinated and excessively self-promoting. William confronted him in private, voice tight with frustration. "You can't keep making decisions without thinking about the consequences," he reportedly said. Harry, frustrated and defensive, countered, "I'm just trying to live my life. Why is everything I do seen as a threat?" It was a moment of raw emotional intensity, a collision of responsibility and independence. And in that room, a seed of permanent tension was planted. What made these private confrontations so powerful and so devastating was the emotional complexity. William wasn't angry for the sake of being angry. He was disappointed, heartbroken, and deeply concerned. He saw a brother he loved drifting into a world of fame, media attention, and public scrutiny, and he feared the consequences, not just for Harry, but for their family, their legacy, and the monarchy itself. Harry, in turn, felt misunderstood. He felt constrained by rules, by expectations, by a world that he couldn't fully embrace on his own terms. Every confrontation became a battle of perspectives, each laden with emotional stakes that extended far beyond the words spoken. The palace walls witnessed countless arguments of this nature. Sometimes they were brief, fiery exchanges, voices raised, accusations flung, tears threatening to spill. Other times, they were quiet, lingering conversations, each brother struggling to articulate feelings of frustration, hurt, or fear. And in each case, the private nature of the confrontation magnified its intensity. There were no mediators, no public narratives to soften the blow. Only the raw truth of two brothers confronting the reality that their bond was changing, and not necessarily for the better. One particularly intense confrontation occurred after a major public event. Harry had been praised for his performance, charm, and engagement with attendees. The media celebrated him as charismatic, spontaneous, and authentic. A stark contrast to William's measured and disciplined presence. William, however, felt frustrated. In his eyes, Harry's public persona threatened the balance and reputation of the family. In a private meeting later that evening, he reportedly expressed his concern, pleading with Harry to consider the long-term implications of his choices. Harry, feeling cornered and misunderstood, responded with raw emotion, defending his independence and insisting that he was only following his own instincts. These moments were not isolated incidents. They occurred repeatedly, each adding layers of tension to their relationship. Advisors and close family members observed subtle shifts. The way the brothers avoided certain topics, the guarded nature of private conversations, the moments of forced smiles during public engagements. William's concern grew as Harry's choices increasingly diverged from what he considered responsible and appropriate. For Harry, the confrontations were both liberating and painful. He could assert himself, but each disagreement deepened the emotional distance between him and William. What made these confrontations particularly devastating was the underlying love that remained. Neither brother wanted to hurt the other, yet the clash of personalities, priorities, and perspectives made conflict inevitable. William's love manifested as caution, protection, and discipline. Harry's love manifested as loyalty to his own instincts, a desire for freedom, and a willingness to challenge expectations. And when these forms of love collided, the result was emotional turbulence of the highest order. The palace walls bore witness to arguments that could have remained private but eventually leaked to insiders. Whispers of late-night confrontations, stern warnings, and emotional breakdowns spread slowly, fueling speculation among staff, advisors, and eventually the public. And while the headlines often portrayed Harry as rebellious and William as stern, the truth was far more nuanced. These were two brothers struggling to reconcile love, loyalty, ambition, and responsibility within a framework of immense public scrutiny. In one revealing episode, William allegedly confronted Harry about his growing media presence, expressing frustration that Harry was prioritizing fame over family. Harry, feeling attacked and misunderstood, responded with a pointed reminder, "I'm still your brother, but I need to live my life my way." The exchange was emotionally charged, filled with tears, frustration, and unspoken fears. Both brothers walked away shaken, each realizing that the path forward would not be easy or straightforward. These confrontations set the stage for what would later become a full-blown rift. The emotional stakes were high. William, desperate to protect his family and their legacy. Harry, determined to assert his independence and identity. Every argument, every disagreement, every misinterpreted gesture added weight to the growing tension. The private confrontations revealed not just differences in personality, but a fundamental clash in values. Tradition versus freedom, duty versus self-expression, loyalty versus ambition. And yet, there were still moments of reconciliation, brief windows where laughter and shared memories reminded them of the bond that had once seemed unbreakable. These moments were fleeting, precious, and heartbreaking in their impermanence. They highlighted the complexity of the relationship, the love, the loyalty, and the shared history, all shadowed by the growing awareness that their paths might no longer align. As the private confrontations intensified, the emotional toll on both brothers became more apparent. William reportedly experienced sleepless nights, worrying about Harry's choices, feeling helpless in the face of a brother he could no longer fully guide. Harry, meanwhile, felt the weight of judgment, responsibility, and expectation pressing on him even as he pursued his own path. The palace, once a sanctuary of childhood adventure and familial love, became a stage for emotional battles that neither brother could escape. These confrontations were pivotal. They were the moments when words, emotions, and unspoken fears collided, revealing the depth of the growing divide. William's heartbreak and frustration were real, palpable, and deeply human. Harry's desire for autonomy and self-expression was equally intense, driven by a need to define his own identity. And in the silence that often followed these confrontations, both brothers were forced to confront a painful truth. Their relationship was no longer what it had once been. But what came next? The private messages, the confrontations that turned into emotional explosions, and the moments where William reportedly said words that left Harry in tears, would escalate the tension to a level no one could have anticipated. The private confrontations behind palace walls were just the beginning. They were the cracks in the foundation, the first signs of a fracture that would one day shake not only their relationship, but the entire monarchy. And as we move into the next chapter, you'll see how the media storm amplified these private struggles, turning personal disagreements into public spectacle and pushing both William and Harry further toward an emotional breaking point. The question remains, can love survive when loyalty, ambition, and the spotlight collide? What happens when private pain becomes public spectacle? When the walls that once protected a family suddenly feel like glass, and the entire world watches your heartbreak as if it were entertainment? For William and Harry, the media storm wasn't just about headlines. It was about invasion, exposure, and a relentless magnification of every argument, every disagreement, every tear shed behind palace walls. The media didn't just report their lives. It amplified every crack, every tension, and every misstep, turning personal struggles into a narrative for the world to consume. The storm began subtly. At first, it was small stories, a misinterpreted comment in an interview, a photograph capturing a fleeting expression, a speculative article about growing tensions between the brothers. But the ripple effect was immediate. The British tabloids, known for their aggressive coverage of the royal family, jumped on every hint of discord. Headlines screamed of sibling rivalry, rebellion, and betrayal. Pundits dissected body language, tone of voice, and subtle gestures, turning minor incidents into dramatic narratives. Every public appearance by the brothers became a potential flashpoint, a visual confirmation of what the press claimed, that William and Harry were at odds. Harry's growing media presence only fueled the frenzy. As he stepped further into the spotlight, charity events, global tours, interviews with high-profile figures, journalists seized on every opportunity to paint a picture of divergence. William, cautious and disciplined, often appeared measured and reserved, contrasting sharply with Harry's energy, spontaneity, and charm. The media narrative quickly formed. William, the responsible heir; Harry, the rebel prince. And while the public debated who was right or wrong, both brothers felt the sting of intrusion, their private struggles becoming fodder for speculation. The emotional toll was immense. For William, seeing the world dissect his brother's every action was heartbreaking. He had always wanted to guide Harry, to protect him from the pressures of fame and expectation. Yet now, every choice Harry made, every step into public view, became a headline that William had little control over. The media's relentless scrutiny transformed concern into frustration, frustration into heartbreak, and heartbreak into a growing sense of helplessness. Harry, on the other hand, experienced the media storm differently. Initially, he may have viewed it as validation, proof that he was noticed, that his individuality mattered. that the world recognized him beyond the confines of the palace. But over time, the constant attention became invasive, exhausting, and psychologically taxing. Every private moment could be leaked, every conversation potentially misrepresented. The pressure of living under a microscope strained his relationship with William even further, intensifying misunderstandings and emotional distance. The media storm reached a critical point with what insiders described as a series of escalating leaks. Private conversations, text messages, and family interactions began surfacing in newspapers and online publications. Some stories were fabricated, others exaggerated, but all contributed to a growing narrative of a royal family in crisis. William reportedly struggled to reconcile these reports with his personal knowledge of the truth. The frustration of seeing family matters misrepresented on a national and international stage added a new layer of tension, creating an environment in which private confrontations became increasingly unavoidable. One particularly intense incident involved a high-profile public appearance where the brothers were photographed together. Observers noted subtle cues, tense smiles, awkward posture, and apparent avoidance of eye contact. The media immediately speculated on the meaning of these gestures. Headlines described a frozen relationship, brothers at war, and palace tensions at breaking point. While some of the interpretation may have been overblown, the scrutiny amplified the emotional stakes. William, already worried about Harry's path, now faced public speculation that threatened to misrepresent his intentions, painting him as cold or antagonistic. The media storm also shaped public perception in profound ways. Audiences were drawn into the drama, choosing sides, and sharing opinions on social media. Online discussions fueled misinformation, creating an environment where even minor disagreements were magnified into controversies. For the brothers, this created additional stress. Personal choices that might have remained private became symbolic of larger familial conflict. Every action, every word, every glance was scrutinized, analyzed, and interpreted, leaving little room for nuance or reconciliation. Amid this frenzy, Harry's rising prominence in the media became both a blessing and a curse. His charm, candor, and charisma attracted positive attention, expanding his influence and public appeal. Yet it also painted a portrait of divergence, emphasizing contrasts between him and William. While Harry may have thrived on the recognition, William faced the consequences. The public interpreted differences as deliberate slights, disagreements as personal betrayals, and independence as rebellion. The media's framing intensified the emotional rift, creating a feedback loop that neither brother could easily escape. The media storm also played a role in shaping private interactions. Both William and Harry were acutely aware that even private disagreements could be leaked, exaggerated, or distorted. This awareness heightened tension, making conversations more charged, arguments more intense, and reconciliations more fragile. What once may have been a minor disagreement behind palace walls now carried the weight of national attention. Every word mattered, every gesture scrutinized, every decision weighed against the public narrative. Some of the most damaging effects of the media storm were psychological. William reportedly experienced anxiety and frustration over the public portrayal of his brother, feeling powerless to control the narrative. Harry, meanwhile, wrestled with guilt, frustration, and the pressure to live up to both his family's expectations and his public persona. The constant exposure, combined with the emotional weight of private disagreements, created a storm that threatened to engulf both brothers, their relationship, and their sense of self. Yet amid the chaos, there were moments of resilience. Both brothers continued their public duties, charitable work, and appearances, striving to maintain professionalism while navigating personal turmoil. These moments of composure masked deeper emotional currents, revealing a complexity often lost in media interpretation. For William, maintaining poise was an act of responsibility. For Harry, it was a balance between public expectation and personal freedom. The media storm, however, could not be contained. Each new headline, photo, or leak added fuel to the fire. Stories about Harry's media appearances, interviews, and lifestyle choices became intertwined with narratives of familial conflict, creating a feedback loop of speculation, scrutiny, and emotional strain. For William, The emotional toll grew heavier with each passing day. He faced the impossible task of balancing public perception, personal disappointment, and the love he still held for his brother. And the public? They were captivated. Newspapers, television programs, and social media platforms dissected every detail, offering commentary, analysis, and speculation. The story of two brothers, once inseparable, now seemingly divided, became a national fascination. Every interaction, every public appearance, every word uttered by either prince was interpreted through the lens of the growing rift. What had begun as subtle differences in personality and choices had now become a matter of public intrigue and emotional drama. But what came next? The private consequences of this relentless media scrutiny, the confrontations that escalated as a result, and the moments where William's heartbreak collided with Harry's ambition, would push their relationship to a breaking point. The media storm was only the backdrop, the magnifying lens, for the real drama unfolding behind closed doors. In the next chapter, we'll explore William's heartbreak, the personal toll of watching his brother embrace fame at the cost of family, and the private moments that left him questioning whether the brother he loved so dearly even existed anymore. The stakes are higher than ever, and the emotional fallout is only just beginning. What does it feel like to watch the person you once knew completely transform into someone you no longer recognize? To witness choices that once would have been unimaginable now take center stage? For Prince William, that heartbreak wasn't sudden. It was slow, subtle, and agonizing. Each public appearance, every interview, every headline about his younger brother's rising fame felt like a small betrayal. William had always loved Harry with a fierceness few could understand, but that love became intertwined with fear, frustration, and a deep, aching sorrow. It wasn't just the fame. It wasn't merely the media appearances or Hollywood connections. William's heartbreak was rooted in the intimate knowledge of who Harry had been. He remembered their shared childhood, the laughter echoing through Kensington Palace, the secret hideaways, the whispered late-night conversations. He remembered a boy who looked up to him, who trusted him completely, who was fiercely loyal. And now, in his mind, that boy was changing before his eyes. He saw Harry stepping away from family, stepping into a world that demanded attention, influence, and personal glory. And with each step, William felt a pang of helplessness. William's heartbreak was private, often unspoken. Behind palace walls, in quiet rooms away from public view, he wrestled with emotions that were complex and raw. He felt anger, yes, but it was intertwined with sorrow. He felt frustration, yes, but it was laced with concern. And he felt betrayal, not because Harry had done something malicious, but because he seemed to have chosen a path that disregarded the bond they once shared. Every glance at his brother's media appearances, every article dissecting Harry's actions, and every publicized interview amplified the emotional strain. Some moments were subtle but telling. William would notice Harry's absence from certain family discussions, or a change in tone when they spoke privately. A casual remark might carry an unintentional sting. "I'm doing what I think is right," Harry would say, almost defensively. And William, sensing the shift, would reply cautiously, attempting to bridge a growing gap. But those moments often ended in silence or frustration, a reflection of how deeply the rift had grown. The emotional weight wasn't limited to private spaces. Public life amplified every disappointment. At official engagements, William had to maintain composure, smiling for cameras, speaking with precision, and masking the turmoil he felt inside. Meanwhile, Harry's dynamic presence drew attention, sometimes overshadowing William. He was vibrant, charismatic, and fearless, a stark contrast to William's measured, reserved approach. And every public comparison, whether intentional or perceived, deepened William's emotional burden. William's heartbreak was compounded by the awareness of public perception. Every smile, every nod, every gesture between the brothers was scrutinized by millions. Social media amplified emotions into spectacle. Headlines suggested tension, discord, and conflict. Some commentators accused William of being cold or distant. Others framed Harry as rebellious and ungrateful. But the truth was far more human, far more intimate. William felt the weight of love, responsibility, and fear that Harry was moving too far from the family he once knew. One particularly painful moment came during a family event where both brothers were present. William reportedly watched Harry interact with attendees, engaging freely with the media and public, while he remained restrained, focused on duty and protocol. The contrast was stark. For William, it wasn't jealousy, it was grief. He mourned the distance, the difference in priorities, and the sense that the brother he knew, the brother he had shared so much with, was no longer the same person. That night, in the quiet of his private quarters, William reportedly expressed frustration and sorrow to a close confidant, revealing the depth of his emotional struggle. The heartbreak wasn't one-sided. Harry, unaware of the full extent of William's feelings, often interpreted his brother's caution or concern as criticism, judgment, or control. This misunderstanding fueled further tension, creating a feedback loop of emotional distance.